What's up, you guys? Rener and Ryron Gracie here at the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Torrance, California. We wanted to make this video to address Hurricane Harvey, which has devastated Houston and the surrounding areas. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands of people displaced. When this happened, and of course we became aware of it like everyone else through the news, and knowing that we had friends who lived in Houston, obviously we wanted to help. And Rener was like, Hannah, we need to go to Houston. Let's get in over there. And let's go do what we can, get on a boat and go do whatever we got to do to help. And I thought, wow, that would be a really interesting experience, and certainly they could use the help right now. But then I'm thinking, well, is that the best thing we can do for Houston in this unbelievably crazy time? So then I thought, well, what about doing a seminar and getting all the funds together and donating the full proceeds of a seminar to hurricane relief efforts. And then we realized that one of our longtime and very good friends and former students here of the Gracie Academy lives in Houston, and we actually got to speak to him, and he's joining us here in this live discussion from his house in Houston, Caesar Wright. And Caesar had a different opinion on what we could do and what we should do to try to help the people in Houston right now, because this is his second hurricane that he's actually lived through and had to deal with in Houston, and he had some incredible insight in terms of what the best plan of action and what the best service would be for those who are victims of this current hurricane disaster there in Houston. So Caesar, why don't you take it away and kind of explain how we got to this position in this point.
First, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you reaching out in the flood. It means a lot, just even the moral support of people, knowing that people care and are concerned and want to help. And I think a lot of times people's impulse is to go there and lend hands and put feet on the ground. And sometimes that's what's needed. We had a lot of rescues happening, things like that. But often, and I think in the case of you guys, what's more powerful is the informational resources and the network that you have and your ability to get information out to people. And that has an entirely different power. That's the difference between helping people for 1 or 2 days and helping them in a way that's going to make a 2-year recovery process smoother and easier, and ultimately get them and their family back into their homes. And so that's what I suggested, is that we mobilize that community, the jiu-jitsu community, and the network that you have to get information to people who need it.
Yeah, we're very obviously, we're here in sunny Southern California. We're not dealing with these type of threats. We have other concerns occasionally, but nothing of this magnitude has struck us, at least in our lifetimes. And for us, we're all about self-defense. We're all about preparing, for the worst case scenario. That is what jiu-jitsu is. And after Caesar told us his story from the hurricanes that he has, kind of had to deal with and overcome, we thought that he had invaluable insight for flood kind of survivors and victims of floods and hurricanes like this. So we just thought it would be a great idea for him to tell his story and some of the top tips of self-defense. And I just, especially in the aftermath of the flood. So if you're someone watching this and you're not in Houston, or you're not in a flood zone, or you're not in a hurricane zone, and this hasn't affected you or doesn't affect you, then that's fine. But if you're someone who either is in Houston right now, or someone who is, please share this video so they can get access to this resource and this information. Because to be honest, some people who live in Houston right now have never experienced, well, most people have never experienced anything like this. But even a hurricane of the past or a flood of the past, they haven't even experienced, like Caesar has twice.
Yes, and experience is the greatest teacher. And the people in Houston that were there for the last flood, the Memorial Day flood
2015.
you mentioned, I'm sure they went through, some really hard times to get out of that and get over it. And Caesar had mentioned that he's just only after 2 years finally, getting settled, and now this flood hits him. So people did things what they did years ago in that flood, and now this flood has hit them. So if they can approach this flood forward with more strategy and more technique,
yeah,
that's better. That's good for
and the
them.
thing is
so
this,
that alone is worth it.
And before the flood, or when the flood happens, you have the enemy, the opponent is the water, is the wind, is the disaster, is all of the things that the victims there dealt with. But after the flood is over and the hurricane is passed, the opponent are the insurance companies, the county kind of ordinances in place to make sure that, regarding the assessment of the house and the value and the damage and whatnot, the contractors and the vultures, right? The people who come in and try to take advantage of unsuspecting targets and flood victims. So these people are the opponents after the fact, and we felt that Caesar had such a good understanding of how to deal with all these different elements and how there's so many fights that have to be fought here on so many fronts, that he could provide invaluable insight in that process. And really, after hearing it, and we knew nothing about this until he explained it to us, after hearing about it, Caesar's ability to explain and kind of navigate this fight is, and his understanding now, is like getting into a fight with jiu-jitsu. He has the knowledge, he has the skills, he has the experience. Imagine getting into a street fight without the knowledge that we have. It's an absolute disaster. And imagine dealing with the insurance, the contractors, the city after a flood. It's an absolute disaster, especially if you have no idea what you're doing. So we try to make a somewhat brief video there or here for those who need it most, detailing the most important elements of, the most important tips or techniques for self-defense in the wake of a catastrophic hurricane like this one. So Caesar, why don't you take us to the first tip or concern that you'd like to address for the people in Houston there?
Yeah, and it's cool that you frame it that way. It's kind of funny because when I went through the flood the first time, I thought a lot about even, I remember the first time that I learned the mount escape from you guys. And there's a video of it somewhere, and Henner's explaining that no matter what you do, you can rail and fight against this with force and strength, and you can flail and you can be angry, but it's irrelevant if you don't know the technique and the way to deal with this properly. And that's what it was like for me dealing with all of the issues that came from the flood the first time. I was mad, I was scared, didn't know, I was confused, just like you would be in a fight. But you can rail against that all you want. If you don't know the processes to deal with this, it's the same as escaping the mount. You're going to be stuck, and eventually that bigger, stronger opponent is always going to win. In this case, you're dealing with multiple opponents. You have the flood, then you have FEMA and the insurance companies, then you have the city, and you have to be able to use proper technique to deal with each of these different threats. And so one of the biggest threats that people aren't aware of, people know about a lot of the threats, but there's something in the city of Houston. It comes from a federal policy, but the city policy supersedes the federal policy, and it's called the substantial damage ordinance. Now, what that means is that if they determine that your house is flooded, is damaged in a flood by more than 50%, either of the monetary value or the structural value, the city will block you from getting any permits to repair. And that means not just the standard permits you would get, electric, plumbing. You can't even get permits to put back in drywall or sheetrock or your floors. If you do any of that, you'll be in violation of that policy. So for people who are on that list, it makes it impossible to rebuild their home and get back to their life. So one of the first things that you're gonna have to figure out, and it's the whole position before submission, before you move towards consolidating your situation, getting your insurance and everything else, figure out what your position is in terms of your ability to rebuild. Make sure you do what you can to get off of that substantial damage list. I'll post online more detailed overviews of these things, but basically what you need to know is that there will be an inspection. You can request an inspection of your home. There's several ways to get off of this list if they determine you're substantially damaged. One is to get a contractor estimate that shows that the damages to your house are less than half of the monetary structural value. That's one way. Another way that you can deal with it is requesting an inspection. They'll send out a city, county, or federal inspector to look at your property and say, even though there was a lot of financial monetary damage, the structure was less than 50% damage, so you can get off that way. That's how I got off of the list last time. Before I got off of that, I couldn't rebuild my house.
Thank you, Caesar. Let me just interrupt for 1 second because, especially for people who aren't familiar with the substantial damage clause and kind of policy there, it's a little bit kind of confusing because some people are saying, well, if I had my house in a flood, don't I want it to be substantially damaged to get the most covered? And what Caesar's pointing out, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me where I'm wrong here, is that once it passes a certain damage threshold, the city will only allow you to rebuild, because they're going to restrict you from getting those reconstruction permits, but they'll only allow you to rebuild if you build your house on an elevated platform that is above the flood threshold, and that elevated platform rebuilding of your house, which is basically a completely reconstruction, that cost is not covered by insurance. That falls on you 100%. So you're trying to avoid having to rebuild your house from scratch on a platform by keeping yourself below or off the substantial damage list.
As much as everybody would love to have their homes built on a platform, I would love my platform to be 10, 15 feet
Yeah, 100%.
off the ground. That costs a lot of money,
Especially in this time,
which is why people can't do it.
Yes, it comes out of your own pocket. So just to clarify, that's why you don't want to be on this list, right, Caesar?
Exactly. And it's possible that there are certain government grants out there later that you can apply for if you can't get off the list, if you need to elevate, but they're very difficult to get. In Houston, it took over a year and a half before that money even came in. So people were out of their homes for a year to a year and a half if they were even eligible for that funding. So your first step is try to get off of that, because otherwise it may be cost prohibitive. It may not be possible for you to afford. For me, that it would cost me, I have about $175,000 in damage to my house. That would add an additional 100 to 150,000. No way I can afford 300,000 to raise my house. It's just not possible. So I want to help people get off of that list. And then if you can't, then that's when you have the other slices. You have the other alternate techniques, the adjustments to the technique that we can try to find a way to deal with the situation if you can't get off of the list. And I'll put that information online for people.
All right, so why don't you take us to number 2 and talk to us a little bit about these kind of vultures that kind of swoop in, contractors, unscrupulous contractors, as you call them, who come in after a flood like this. They know everyone is in a desperate position. They know everyone wants an answer and wants something done right away. What are the things they have to watch out for when it comes to these kind of incoming influx of contractors?
Yeah, so last time, within a day after the flood, I had at least 10 people come to my door, like car salesmen, pressuring me to sign a contract, an open-ended contract, for them to come in and do what's called water remediation or mitigation, which means they're drying out your house. That process is important. It has to be done. But if you sign an open-ended contract and let them bill your insurance company, if they're above board, that's fine. But if they're not, some of my neighbors ended up paying $20,000 for $2,000 to $6,000 worth of flood remediation. And if you sign that contract, you're going to be responsible for that money. And in a lot of cases, they charge for things that your insurance will not reimburse for. There's a certain maximum number of dehumidifiers and fans you can put in based on your square footage. In the case of my house, that's 5. Some of these companies went and put 20 fans and dehumidifiers in people's houses and charged them daily rental for each of those and left them in there for 2 weeks. So you have to be very careful of that. If somebody pressures you to sign a contract, tell them to slow down. There's, another day is not going to hurt anything. Look into your options. Think about your position. Think about what you can do, and find somebody legitimate. And sign a contract for a discrete service and a discrete amount of money that's preset. Don't sign an open-ended, just give somebody a blank check.
There's so much going on, right? It's such a hard time in these people's lives that it makes sense that they want to sign it and get it done with and solve the problem and get back to normal.
And not read the small print, yeah.
But what you said about taking your time, 1 more day, 2 more days, it's obviously it's going to be tough, but it's worth it in the end. Like you mentioned, you had neighbors who paid $20,000 out of pocket because the insurance wouldn't cover it. So don't rush to get back to your life as much as you want to.
Well,
take your time.
And it's jiu-jitsu. It's the right move at the wrong time is the wrong move. So being patient and applying your flood remediation, water damage kind of strategy at the right time under the right contract kind of specifications with an above board contractor is the way to go. So talk about what the importance is of choosing a legitimate contractor. If you learned anything last time in terms of how to find that person and what a legitimate and good contractor can do to help you through the process, especially when it comes to dealing with insurance and whatnot, and making sure that you get all the repairs you actually need and deserve.
One thing I would encourage people is go local. You're gonna have a lot of people coming in. I have trucks up and down my street right now with license plates from Alabama and Florida and Louisiana and Mississippi. Now the problem is they're gonna come in and tell you, yeah, we can sign a contract, we can get you up and running in 2 months, a month. That's not the case. It takes, at 3:14 p.m. on the day that I was evacuating through the floodwater, I got an email that I was receiving the final insurance check from the flood 2 years ago. That's how long it takes. And so if these people tell you they're going to come in and fix you up and you're going to be good to go in 3 months, it's very unlikely. I'm not going to say they're lying, but it's very unlikely. And the problem is, just think about it logistically. If people are coming here from across the country, how long are they going to stay? Are they going to be here for the long haul? Are they going to be here to help you through this process 6 months from now when FEMA wants an adjusted proof of loss and you have to add additional damages? I strongly recommend that you go local, find a reputable contractor, check their credentials. This is like picking a jiu-jitsu academy. Make sure you know who you're dealing with and that they're legitimate. We don't want any fake black belt contractors working on your house.
One question is, when you say go local, that's also kind of tricky because there's homes for over 100 miles, right, that have been damaged. So, I mean, how many contractors exist? If you go local, you might have to wait 5 more months, right? Because how much can they work on? How much can they do, one contractor team?
It's tough.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, that was one of the difficulties for me, is finding crews, securing them. Ultimately, it's going to take that long for you to start getting your checks anyway. And, the problem you're going to have if you try to rush it, luckily we're the 3rd largest city, I think, now in the country. There's a lot of construction, a lot of new home construction, a lot of work being done here. So around Texas, there are a lot of companies. It may be frustrating. You may have to wait a little longer to work with a good company. But like I said, you're going to be waiting on that insurance money to come through. It's going to be a long process. Be prepared for that. This is not a 3-minute fight. This is a 20-minute old school Rener and Gracie fight. This is going to last for a long time. And you have to have the stamina to make it through that.
I see. I was going to say, Cesar, talk to us a little bit about the third tip that you had mentioned to us was the importance of a public adjuster in a situation like this, especially when it comes to getting a fair amount of damage, kind of loss coverage from the insurance companies, from FEMA. Explain a little bit about how that relationship works with FEMA and what a public adjuster, a good public adjuster, can help you do, and what it did for you in the last flood.
What I'll do is I'll transition from the contractor. So there's a point at which your contractor and your public adjuster are going to work very close together. So starting with the contractor, they can be essential in helping you get off that substantial damage list, because they're going to have to go down and file permits for you with the city. They're going to have to sign onto your permits. They're going to have to give you a written estimate of damages. That's essential both for proving your damages so you get your insurance money and for getting off the substantial damage list. So if you have a contractor that's not responsive, they don't get back to you, they're hard to reach, it's going to be very difficult. My contractor, who's brown belt in jiu-jitsu, so I knew him through that community, but he went down and sat there in the floodplain office with me for hours to get this done. That's the kind of person you need. So they'll help get you off that list. Then you'll hit the next phase, which I highly recommend working with a public adjuster. To put it, shortly, what a public adjuster does is they're an insurance adjuster that works for you instead of for the insurance company. So the insurance company adjuster, their goal is to bring your damages down. You tell them your walls were destroyed, you need new sheetrock. They say, well, let's put some straw and paper clips back up there. We can fix it. Their goal is to get the price down. Your public adjuster works for you to make sure that you're informed, you're knowledgeable, and you're protected, and you get everything that you are owed in terms of what it legitimately costs to rebuild your house. For me, the insurance company initially offered about $60,000. My public adjuster ultimately got me around $140-some thousand during the first flood. We still had $170,000 in damages, so I took some losses, but not near as much as what I would have taken otherwise.
You had also mentioned that there are some things that you might be unaware of that you could actually get insurance money for and get reimbursed for, right? There are damages that you don't even aren't aware of, and your public adjuster can see those and say, hey, this happened and this happened. That's more money coming to you, which is also very valuable.
So there's two aspects to that. One is that the public adjuster gets paid. You don't pay them. They get a percentage of new money that they earn for you. meaning if they don't earn you any money, then they get 10% of zero. On the other hand, if they earn you $100,000, they get 10% of that, but that's money that you would have never had otherwise. So one key is make sure you contract with the public adjuster after you get your initial proof of loss. So you have the insurance adjuster come out, whatever they offer you, that is yours regardless. The public adjuster won't touch that. Contract with the public adjuster after that. And that's when that expertise comes in. So the public adjuster knows things that you just don't know. In my case, the public adjuster knew that there's gypsum board, backer board behind your walls that has a vapor barrier. You can't replace that from the inside. It costs about $30,000 to do for the entire house. I didn't even know that was a thing. I don't know anything about building houses. So she knew that, and she was able to add that, get an engineer out here and get that money. A lot of coverage items that I had no clue were possible. She was able to get us coverage because she had that knowledge, and that's invaluable. And I strongly recommend finding a good public adjuster. It makes a huge difference.
Thanks for sharing that, Caesar. That's incredibly important. I can only imagine, in the wake of a catastrophe like this, trying to determine what has value and what's not, but to know that there are professionals out there who do this type of assessment. But what's interesting is that as I'm kind of following the tips here, so tip number one is get off the substantial damage list and make sure that they don't require you to completely reconstruct your house on an elevated platform. And for that, you want to, essentially display your damages as low as possible to make sure that it seems as reparable as possible with the greatest amount of ease so that they keep you off the list. But once you're off the list, here's the question I would have. Once I'm off the list, can I have that adjuster and my contractor really go hard to really inflate, as we're talking about, as much as possible the amount of damages to make sure I get the most money back for my insurance losses? Is that fair to say that that's kind of how the wave goes, in the sense of lowering it at first? Once you get off the list, you actually want to go up and get as much kind of compensation as possible?
Exactly. So that's how it works. Initially, you want to get those damages as low as possible so that you can get off of that substantial damage list and be able to repair your house. Once you've done that, then you can work with the public adjuster and your contractor and get an estimate in to bring up that proof of loss so that you ultimately get closer to your actual damages. Because no matter what happens, the insurance is not going to cover the full scope of your damages. You're going to lose money either way. So this is not about getting over or gaming the system. It's really about trying to do what you can to come as close as you can to repairing and recovering what you've lost. And you're going to be dealing with a lot of agencies that are stacked against you, that their interests are not necessarily the same as yours, and they're going to put a lot of roadblocks in your way. So navigating that process and doing it in the right order is going to be essential to trying to recover and get as much as you can out of your insurance. And once you get off of that substantial damage list, then you can bring that estimate up. You're not going to be put back on that list. You're not going to be penalized for the scope of damages changing, but you will then have more money to rebuild your house and get back to normal.
Yeah, you only want to get off the list because being on the list is ridiculous. The fact that you have to raise your house, it's unaffordable.
Right.
People can't do it.
It's crazy.
If everybody was on the list, how many would not rebuild? How many would be homeless?
99% probably could not rebuild if they get thrown on the substantial damage list, I would assume.
The fight to stay off the list is
the
to
fight
survive.
Yeah, it's to survive. They're just trying to keep their lives,
Survival is the key, and it's not just about surviving and repairing your house. In some cases, this is about people, life or death issues. And I'll give you an example. In the last flood, I worked with a lady. I tried to help her out. Her husband was on a lung transplant list, and he had made that list. He was going to die within a year if he didn't have the lung transplant. And the city was preventing them from rebuilding their house because they were on the substantial damage list. Now, without rebuilding their house, the doctors told them, we're going to have to take you off this list. If you don't have somewhere that you can return that's safe, then you're a high risk. We're going to have to give your spot on this list to somebody else on the transplant list, which would have been a death sentence for him. And I worked with them, helped them find a way to get off of that list. They were able to rebuild their house. He stayed on the transplant list, got his lung transplant, and is alive today. And he had to go into the attic this time. Their house, he's going to be dealing with that again. But he's alive today because he was able to get off of that list and rebuild his house and get his transplant. So in some cases, it's not just figurative. This is actually literally can save people's lives knowing this information.
Yes. Yeah, Caesar, we can't thank you enough for sharing your experiences from the last flood and from this one. Obviously, we wish you the best in terms of the getting, because this process now is just beginning for you for this current flood situation. So you have, quite a fight in front of you. Obviously, we're here, anything you need. And to the people out there who are watching this, and whether if you're not in Houston, do whatever you can to help someone who's there. If that's a donation, that's great. If you can't donate, then share the information, share the video with someone, because chances are you can give someone $100, $1,000, $10,000, but they can save, like Caesar did, $80,000, $90,000 if they have the right information. They can get more for their insurance losses, more for their property loss from the insurance, and information really is the most valuable asset in a situation like this. So Caesar, we thank you once again, and we wish everyone the best. And we're here, you guys.
And the people out there, they might want to connect with Caesar and kind of learn more from him, because this is not all that he knows.
Correct.
So how did they get a hold of Caesar?
Yeah, so Caesar's website, we're going to put on the screen here, KeynoteEyeCenter.com. He created a Facebook page as well to make sure that you guys have all the information, all the resources. And of course, if you're in Houston and you need some of the, someone to talk to and someone to ask questions about this process, maybe you hadn't gone through it before like he has, you can reach out to Caesar through his website, and I'm sure he'd be willing to help. And this is just, we can't even imagine. We don't wish this or hope for this happens to us or to anyone else. We know it will. So, this video will remain on the internet, and one day when someone else needs it or another community needs it, hopefully it'll be there and provide some service for those who take action with it.
Thank you guys again. I can't tell you how much this means to me personally and to a lot of people. I really appreciate you taking the time. You guys have dedicated yourself to helping people in worst case scenarios, helping people deal with bullying, rape prevention, self-defense. And this is about defending yourself against the elements and against government and against a really disastrous situation that's impacting hundreds of thousands of people. With Hurricane Irma coming in, this may even get worse. So thank you so much for helping me get this information out there. Information is the key. The power of knowing the proper technique is going to help a lot of people. I will make this information available. I'm creating a web page. Once again, I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody that's gone through this now twice, and I want to share what I know and try to make it a little bit easier for people. Anybody that wants help, please feel free to contact me directly. If I can't help you, I'll try to put you in contact with somebody that can. I'll post resources to try to make it a little bit easier for you. And I do have a GoFundMe as well. If people around the country are wanting to contribute to flood victims and you want to know where the money's going, I encourage you to find a family or somebody that story resonates with you. If that's mine, you can feel free to donate to our recovery fund. And if I can help you in any way or help a friend or a family member, reach out to me and let me know, and I'll see what I can do. And one of the things I also wanted to say, from a jiu-jitsu perspective is, so when we evacuated, we walked 10 miles from our house. We left, I put the girls and the dog on an air mattress, and we waded through chest deep water, ended up walking out nearly 10 miles. And you really start to appreciate how jiu-jitsu applies to all aspects of life, that you're facing a bigger, stronger opponent, Mother Nature. You can't fight that, right? Remaining calm, figuring out what you can do, when's the appropriate time to execute, how do you manage the stress, manage the fear, all of that in that situation, and find a way to survive. And it's something that Hicks and Gracie said once, and I don't remember the exact quote, but basically that the key to always winning is never losing. So never allowing yourself to be defeated by that larger, meaner, tougher, stronger opponent, but finding a way to survive and persevere. And the jiu-jitsu philosophy and mindset really sort of helped me stay in that mind frame as we were evacuating. So I also want to just say that I appreciate what your family has done in spreading that word. And thanks again. Take care.